Right, good morning, colleagues. As we'll get the seminar underway, there's limited time and a lot to say. So I'm Bahram Bekhradnia, president of HEPI, which I established nearly 25 years ago and was director at the time of the original student survey. We're here today to discuss the report that reviews and draws lessons from 20 years of the Student Academic Experience Survey. And I'd just like to say on a personal note, how delighted, but also perhaps a little surprised I am to find that the survey that we launched 20 years ago is still going strong and producing valuable results. Now, just as a piece of history, it's just worth mentioning that when the survey was launched 20 years ago, the £1,000 student fee was increased to £3,000 amid great controversy. And I don't know if anybody else like me feels a little nostalgic for that £3,000 fee. The trustees at the time, and I see that Sir Brian Follett, one of the original trustees, is here with us today, thought that a survey like this would help to establish what extra, if indeed anything extra, students were getting for the increased fee. Anyway, so back to today's seminar. The format is that first, Gosia Turner, the author of today's report, will spend 10 minutes or so reviewing the lessons of the last 20 years, the main points that have arisen. And then we'll move on to the very distinguished panel, the four-member panel that we've assembled, briefly to outline their reactions, their thoughts as a result of that. And then following that, it'll be open for questions, discussion, and so on. So, but first, Gosia Turner, over to you for your contribution, please.
Thank you. Can anyone hear me? Or everyone can hear me, that will be better. And I am going to share my slides. Just give me a sec. How is that? Can someone say something? Because I can't see you now.
It's not sharing at the moment.
It's not sharing, right. Okay, it should share now. How about now?
Yes, that's fine.
Right, okie doke. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I've been only given 10 minutes, so I'm going to be very, very quick and I'm going to talk very quickly. I'm going to show you 10 slides, the headlines from the report that was published this morning. So let's start with methods and data. So obviously, we are talking about a HEPI, Advanced HE Student Academic Experience Survey, and that first launched in 2006, so 20 years ago, and over that period, there were 16 surveys conducted. The data set I've analysed had more than 200,000 responses from undergraduate students. I took all these annual data sets, I harmonised them, and I linked them. I identified common themes, and then I conducted a lot of multivariate logistic regression modeling, which essentially means that you're interested in certain phenomenon, let's say value for money, and then you throw all other variables you've got at it and you see what sticks. And whatever sticks, how important it is relatively to other bits that stick. That's technical explanation, by the way, of regression modeling. And the data set and associated documentation is available to others. So if you fancy a sequel or if you fancy a spin-off, then talk to HEPI. So the four main themes I've mentioned is value for money, satisfaction with academic experience, experience versus expectations, and attendance. And these are the themes that essentially were measured consistently from the very beginning of the survey. Perception of value for money. This is probably the one that changed quite a lot. And as Bara mentioned, there were changes to tuition fees. So we've got a decrease in value of money between 2006 and 2007. And then we've got a steady decrease since 2012 when the 9K fees were introduced. But what you can see, and what you will see throughout the report, is the huge impact of COVID. It had a huge impact on higher education, the same, and it had a huge impact on our lives. And you can see on this graph that in 2021 there is this swap between the yellow line. Now it's up above the black line. So the poor value for money, there was far more students suggesting that they received very poor value for money in that year. When they were asked the question, hello?
Can I ask you to change it to slideshow view because it's currently on presenter view?
How about that?
Perfect, thank you.
You should say that from the beginning. Right. So when they were asked a question about value for money and what they were thinking when they were answering that question, you can see that the top three answers, the most frequently mentioned, was teaching quality, the level of tuition fee for the course, and the course content. When I've put all these questions into a regression model, turns out that the teaching quality still is the most important, but also facilities on offer. So you can think about it, if you're sitting in a nice shiny building, you probably think, well, I'm getting good value for money, rather than you're sitting in a dingy old and moldy building. Course organization, really important. In-person contact time, both with teachers and fellow students, are also very important when they perceive receiving good and very good value for money. There is some evidence in the data that the pandemic cohort consistently were not happy with the value for money they received, not just in the year that was most impacted, by consistently through their studies afterwards. Not surprisingly, Scottish students were reporting getting better value for money, and more surprisingly, international students as well. And the sense of belonging is an important predictor of value for money, and that sense of belonging, you will see that it's actually a common theme through the report, when the sense of belonging became quite an important factor in students' experience. So experience versus expectations. And I should probably say that, again, we have a big COVID impact. Again, we've got that swap in 2021, yellow line over black line. But we don't measure the initial expectations of students. So we just essentially measure how your experience measured up to your expectations, the unknown expectations that you had. We don't know what expectations you had. Overall, a quarter of students stated that their experience was better than expected. 50% said that it was better in some respects and worse in others. This graph I've picked is actually for medicine and dentistry students, and there are not many subject graphs in the report, but I've chose this one here because what you can see is that up to a pandemic, up to 2021, the yellow line and the black line, so the yellow is for experience worse than expected, we want it to be low. Black one is for experience better than expected. They're quite far apart, and they're quite consistently far apart. And then in 2021, you can see there was a swap. Yes, COVID, nobody expected COVID, so it's not a surprise. But then when we look at post-pandemic, medicine and dentistry students, those two lines are actually consistently much closer than they were before the pandemic. And I think throughout the report, you will notice that this particular cohort of students maybe struggled a bit more than others to get out of the pandemic. Right, so experience versus expectations. Those who were well supported in independent study, had a good level of in-person contact with teachers and fellow students, good teaching quality, good course organization, they had a strong sense of belonging on campus, and they were scoring high on well-being scale. All of those students were more likely to say that their experience was better than expected. Conversely, those who said that their experience was worse than expected, the important factors here were when they received a poor teaching quality, when they had not enough support relating to COVID, poor course organization, too little in-person contact time, poor feedback from the teachers, but also not enough disposable income. And I wanted to stop here for a minute because this disposable income, so the survey asked about a number of questions about cost of living crisis, worry about student debt, that sort of thing. But that disposable income became like the most important factor, which suggests to me that it's about, well, I don't have enough money now to actually make the most of the experience rather than, I'm worried about accruing student debt. And finally, the attendance. And that's probably what was covered mostly today in the coverage if you were following the media. It's growing. So the number of scheduled hours versus the number of attended hours, they're going a bit apart. slightly. In 2006, students on average missed around just over an hour of the contact time. But in 2025, they missed more like 2.4 hours of the contact time. Not only that, but also in 2006, 63% of students attended all scheduled classes, but this dropped to 48% in 2025, meaning that more than half of students miss classes. And so not only they miss more, but also more students miss it. There are a few potential culprits for it, and one might be the working intern time. This is my last graph. This is my favorite graph from the report. There's a lot going on this graph. I'm not going to talk about everything, but what I wanted to mention here is that this is the graph that shows you the attendance gap, so the average number of hours missed by term time work. And the black line are students who don't work in term time. The grey lines are for students who work a little bit, so 1 to 9 hours, or the dark grey line for 10 to 19 hours. And then the yellow line are those who work 20 hours or more. And not surprisingly, until COVID, what you can see is obviously those with yellow line are above. They have the largest attendance gap. They miss the most hours on average. But the black line and the grey lines are sort of together. So they're keeping together, which suggests to me that those who work a little bit, they fit their work around the study. And the attendance gap is similar to those who don't work at all. But when we look at COVID, after COVID, and lots of interesting stuff happened in COVID, but I'm not going to discuss that. But what you can see after that is that the black line is almost on its own, and then the grey lines are sticking with the yellow line. So everyone sort of moved up, those who actually work, and their attendance gap has grown. And for me, that suggests that maybe because we changed delivery, maybe the note-taking changed, all sorts of things that changed to education since 2021 means that now it's easier to fit your study around your work. So I thought that's actually quite interesting. So that's me. This is sort of my main takeaways. But I think I'm probably on time, Bahram. I look forward to the discussion. I'm giving the voice to the panel now, and thank you very much.
That's great, Gosia. Thanks very much indeed. So we'll move on straight to the panel discussion now. I won't introduce the panel. You've seen their CVs in the packs, so we'll go straight on with them, and we'll begin with Professor Dame Nicola Dandridge. Nicola, it's over to you.
Thanks very much, Bahram, and thanks, Gosia, and Rose, for a fantastic report. I do think that the Student Academic Experience Survey is incredibly valuable to us. And as far as I'm aware, actually, it's a unique international resource, and having such a spread of questions with national coverage over such a long time. So many thanks to HEPI in advance, HE, and to colleagues for sustaining it. I do think it's really valuable. It is a really useful and interesting report that's been published today, and I'm going to make a few quick observations. The first is how important it is to, in my view, to restate the simple but very essential point that teaching quality is the single most important driver of a positive student experience, and in particular a strong link between students reporting positive value for money and the quality of their teaching. It's such a basic point, but sometimes I think it gets lost in the more sophisticated analysis about student demographics or the impact of IT or whatever it may be. And I think that focus on teaching quality and how we can promote and enhance it is just really essential. Of course, all the other things matter, as the report notes, but I think that's a very good place to start. My second point is that the report overall paints a positive picture, though with understandable and legitimate concerns and questions about, for instance, attendance levels and the impact of employment, as Gosia was just talking about. And the overall picture and focus of the report is on the constructive. What are the factors that point towards a positive student experience? But a point I've long been aware of and think is important is that focus on the positive shouldn't mask the numbers of students who are reporting less positive experiences. And the numbers here are really quite large. So we have 37% of students in these surveys reporting most recently good or very good perceptions of value for money. But the converse is 30% reporting poor or very poor. And if you look at the number of undergraduate students, and if you replicate that number up, which of course you can't legitimately do, but it's a reasonable assumption to make, that's a very, very large number of students who are not happy with the experience they're getting. So although of course our focus should always be on the constructive, I think we have to bear in mind the fact that this is not an altogether overall positive picture, and we do need to think about how we can address that and use this report to try and improve things for those students. And as an extension of that, it's clearly not all about tuition fees. I mean, clearly tuition fees are extraordinarily relevant to considering issues of value for money. But actually, I thought it was really interesting the way the report found that more important actually is the quality of teaching. And I think that's borne out by the Scottish findings, where although clearly there are more people report positive perceptions of value for money, nonetheless, the figures are not that different. And in the context of the absence of tuition fees, the same sorts of issues arise in Scotland as well about teaching quality. My third point is that it's this correlation with a positive student experience and a strong sense of belonging, which comes out quite strongly in the report. And it's not just a correlation actually between a positive student experience, but also with value for money in particular. And I think I find this very plausible, but I wonder whether we can draw from this that it's not just a question of a sense of belonging correlating with perceptions of good value for money and positive experience, but also can we reverse that, and is there a sense in which if students believe that they are receiving good quality teaching, then that supports in itself the feeling of belonging? In other words, a sense of belonging is generated by being involved and engaged in the teaching and learning. And it's that way around just as much as seeing belonging as a necessary precondition for a positive student experience. And I say that because there's so much of a focus in the sector about thinking about the centrality of belonging. But I wonder whether belonging isn't also a consequence of good teaching quality. Anyway, my final point is that the figures are, on the whole, aggregated in the report between years 1, 2, 3, and 4. There's one chart, actually, interestingly, that does disaggregate. And what that shows is different perceptions between years 1, 2, 3, and 4. And although COVID distorts it, we do generally see the students reporting lower perceptions of value for money and positive experience going down between years 1 and 3. And then if you look into the experience of graduates, that also shows decreasing perceptions of positive student experience and value for money. And so I think my final observation is that we probably should look more at that disaggregation, because there's something happening between the different years, possibly a greater focus on graduate outcomes. So without undermining the absolute centrality and importance of undergraduate experiences on the whole, I think we do need to look at how that shifts over time and how it shifts into graduate experiences too. So that's it from me, Bahram, but overall a fantastic report, and it's really good to read it.
Well, thanks so much for that, Nicola. So we'll move straight on now, if that's all right. We're to David. David Green, over to you.
I'd like to start by saying thank you to Gosia and Rose for a very insightful report. And like any really insightful report, it leaves you wanting to know more and to ask more questions. But I also want to thank Cheryl for her very thoughtful foreword, emphasizing that the skillful use of technology and good organization is actually very important. And I love one of the phrases that she's come up with. in her foreword, which is value for money is experienced, not calculated. And I think that's very insightful. Bahram, I want to thank you for establishing this survey all those years ago when I was a young Vice-Chancellor. I'm not nostalgic for the £3,000 fee system, but I would observe that it was actually the best system that we've had in England, certainly in the 21st century. There are a couple of points which Gosia and Rose have made in their report, which I want to emphasize. One is in the introduction, the summary, where they say happy students typically have better experiences than unhappy students, regardless of other factors. And I suppose I emphasize that because it fits in with my own preconceptions and something that I've been saying at University Open Days over the last 23 years, which is that the most important thing for a student to do is to choose an institution where they believe they're going to be happy. Because all my experience and the experience of colleagues is that happy students thrive and go on to be successful and make more of their own specific human potential. And the second thing is right at the end, and this rather tallies with what Nicola has just said, where Gosia and Rose say, while the context of higher education will continue to evolve, the foundations of a strong student experience remain remarkably consistent. High quality teaching, in-person interactions, and a strong sense of belonging are not only enduring principles, they're the anchors that will enable the sector to navigate the challenges ahead. And I think that way of putting things together, which Gosia and Rose do in that nearly concluding paragraph, is very correct. And it's both using the evidence of the survey, but also fits so well, I think, with the experience of those who have so much experience of working and teaching in higher education. One thing that the survey and the report have left me wanting to ask much more about and to learn more about is the way in which the sector, a phrase which is often used and which I think is actually increasingly problematic, is diverging. Because there are very profound country differences. And I want to start off with something which is not much discussed in the report, although there's a little bit about it, which is that there are really quite big differences in the system of student support between England, Wales, and Scotland. Welsh students, on average, whatever their income status, end up with £1,800 more in terms of grant and loan than do English students. And English students, in turn, have, on average per year, £1,700 more than Scottish students when you compare the systems. Now, all of us working in higher education know that the issue of student poverty, which I must say I thought had been banished in the 21st century, has really come back with a vengeance in recent years. And working in Worcester, where we're a sort of border area, we always have about 1 in 20 of our students who are Welsh domiciled and come to us. And there is an observable difference in terms of our experience of how much poverty the Welsh students experience, which is less than the English students, even though on the average they come from backgrounds where there's less money in the family. It's just that the student support systems are so different. And I wonder also what the link is between the 2012 reform in terms of tripling fees and getting rid of the vast majority of teaching grants with the perception of the medicine and dentistry students. Because today's students and the students in the last 5 years whom Gosia commented on have had the sort of vicarious experience of watching those who started their studies in 2012 and are now facing, typically they're working as resident doctors, earning somewhere between £60,000 and £80,000 a year, and they're facing effective marginal deduction rates from their additional pound, each additional pound earned, of 70 to 75% if they have children, to which, of course, the student loan repayment is making a significant contribution, while very little diminishing the debt because of the rate of interest. And this, of course, has become a big national issue this year. And I think that the students' experience is probably telling us something about that, but it would be very interesting to know. And of course, the countries also have very different regulatory systems. England has its quasi-market system with the Office for Students, a powerful regulator, whereas the Scottish and Welsh systems are really rather different and are converging on being much more planned system, much more public sector supported, and it's not just the student fee regime which is different. It's also the balance of having an overall system. And I think you would expect by now, after 8 or 9 years of the Office for Students being in, that if it was going to make a difference for the good for student experience, having a regulator actually named the Office for Students, we would see it in the data, and we don't. And I think that's a big question, which we all ought to grapple with, and which I think future surveys will want to look at more, the difference between the countries. And the final point about sector differences, I believe 7% of students now are franchised students who essentially have a very different kind of campus experience from the ones whom the survey was originally designed to look at and which it's still based on. And again, the experience of a franchised student is a very different experience from that of an on-campus student who's studying directly with staff employed by the university. And the survey has yet to illuminate that, and it's something that future surveys, I think, could usefully look at. Thank you, Bahram and colleagues. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Thank you very much, David, indeed, for that. We'll move straight on to Cheryl Watson.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hopefully you can all see and hear me. Firstly, just to echo colleagues on the panel, it's a real pleasure to be here and from a TechnologyOne perspective to support this thoroughly interesting piece of research. I think we could probably have a session on this for the next few hours, let alone the next 30 minutes. So I'm coming at this from a slightly different perspective in terms of my reflections today. And of course, being a partner to the sector in terms of from a technology standpoint, we see these themes play out across the sector rather than through an individual organisation lens. And I think what feels most striking is not so much how higher education has changed, but rather how the language, the expectations and the accountability around experience have shifted. Reading the findings of this paper, what struck me most was not that the themes were surprising, but they were persistent. The last 2 decades, I think, represents less like a story of sort of changing purpose and more that story of changing expectation. And for me, it feels very much that institutions are being judged increasingly as communities rather than just that provider of education. What that got me reflecting was looking from an outside in, the drivers of those expectations. And I think Rose brought it out really lovely in the piece of the report where she talked about the way in which the world has changed over the last 2 decades. And actually, if you apply a sort of a workplace lens in terms of employee engagement, the strikingly similar patterns, many long-running global surveys of workplace engagement and consistency, they point to the same levels of low engagement, but highlight leadership quality as some of the strongest drivers of experience. And from the outside, those parallels with higher education are really quite hard to ignore. So if you look at teaching quality, it mirrors leadership effectiveness. Indeed, the characteristics outlined on page 32, they're all qualities you'd look at for a great leader of an organisation. Student belonging mirrors employee engagement, and the culture is shaped by that everyday behaviour rather than those structured processes and engagements that historically have been there. Another useful reflection was actually if you just look at the way we've moved and shifted in terms of language and terminology that's used. We've moved away from satisfaction as that primary measure of success, and increasingly we're focused on engagement, whether individuals are feeling involved, connected, able to contribute meaningfully. And I think that shift raises the bar, because engagement requires attention to the environment, the relationships, and trust, not just delivery, which are all good things, I think, for us to consider. I think the other helpful lens is that if you look at the wider world over the past couple of decades, many industries have moved from talking about users or clients to customers, and from customer service to customer satisfaction, and more recently customer experience. So higher education is reflecting and reflecting this shift in that language, and it's more than just semantics for me. It reflects that broader change in expectations away from that isolated transaction and towards that end-to-end view of how people experience an organisation over time. Responsiveness, clarity, consistency, all of which have been highlighted really well in the report. They've become baseline expectations rather than differentiators. And I think in the past, higher education has potentially approached some of that language with caution. Students, we know, are not necessarily customers in a very simple commercial sense, and education is definitely not a product like any other. However, the paper itself provides a really important reference point here, that data highlighted by Gosia on page 53. It shows that gap between what they expect versus what they experience. And of course, that's impacted by all of these things going on in the outside world. And it explains why students increasingly arrive with expectations shaped by that wider world. And of course, it would be remiss of me not to sort of end with a technology overlay on this. But if you look at the years leading up to and following the pandemic, institutions significantly increased investment initially in things like CRM platforms, and that's from some very well-known Gartner studies. Now, those investments were not about treating customers as their students as transactional customers. Instead, they really reflected a recognition that institutions needed better visibility of student journey, stronger relationship management, and a more consistent engagement model, particularly at moments of pressure and disruption. So I think I'll end with, just from a futures perspective, we know the report highlights the importance of being ready for the world of work. And of course, I've said a lot about some of those nuances. But the fact that some of these workforce surveys say that adaptability, judgment, creativity, and resilience, they're all going to be important capabilities, that reframes that teaching quality point that is well made. But it's also consistent with a number of findings in the report that those are the areas that students deem most valuable, not just as knowledge transfer, but as the development of that confidence and capability. So there's lots for us to contend with moving forwards. Greater use of AI and digital augmentation, engagement as belonging are only going to shift more rapidly. So I think it's going to be both a challenge and a real opportunity for the sector to see how we handle those things. I will leave it there.
Cheryl, thank you very much indeed for that. And so finally, moving on to Libby now. Libby Sinclair.
Hello, can everyone hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Yeah, just again wanted to echo the thanks to Rose and Gosia for inviting me today. Really, really pleased to be here. I'll give a little bit of background because I'm also coming at this from a bit of a different perspective. So I am the president of Nottingham Trent Students' Union. I currently work with a lot of university leadership team, academic staff across quite a large and diverse institution, focusing on around policy, teaching, and supporting students in practice. And then previously, I was Vice President Education, so directly supporting that academic experience, the feedback in academic representation systems, and feeding into the governance and decision makings of the university. But I think what's most relevant today is less than in the roles that I've had themselves, but more of the perspective that they've given me. Much of my work has been about translating different part of the system, taking student insights, making it meaningful for decision making, and equally helping students to understand why things are designed the way they are. one of the clearest things that I've seen that comes through in the report is that student experience doesn't live just in one place. It's not just the teaching or support or the well-being. It's an effect of everything put together and everything working together and interacting. The report's emphasis on teaching quality and meaningful interactions with staff and that sense of belonging as a core driver of a positive experience is something really interesting to me, and it shows up in quite tangible ways from my perspective of when it's students asking for help or whether they're getting involved in sort of democracy within the institution. Lost my train of thought now. Sorry. And whether they feel seen. I think that sort of sense of belonging and feeling seen in universities is so important, and can, if it's not there, then that's a barrier to kind of wanting to experience the quality of teaching, wanting to get involved and have that sense of belonging, and helps them kind of navigate what can be quite an overwhelming environment. Alongside that, I've spent a lot of time working directly with students with some of the more difficult parts of the university experience, whether that's kind of academic misconduct, support to study, AI, well-being crisis. And so you can kind of see the compounding effect of the pressures that the report touches on. So things like cost of living, commuting, and mental health on the rise for students. And what's particularly striking to me is how often those pressures don't sit separately. So from the academic experience, but do shape it. So obviously affecting things like attendance, but also the engagement sides and students' ability to fully participate in everything that university has to offer. From my perspective, one of the key challenges for the sector isn't just identifying what matters to students and what matters to universities. I think the sector is quite good at that, but it's more about designing systems and delivery models that genuinely reflect the realities for students' lives now. As we know, it is constantly changing and is still changing, but obviously has done over the past 20 years. I think the report shows it very clearly. And while the context around higher education has changed significantly, it is still changing, and what students need in order to succeed remain relatively consistent in the high quality teaching, accessible and supportive staff, and that genuine sense of belonging. So as part of this panel, I am particularly interested in how we protect and prioritise those core elements of the student experience. And that sense of belonging is so important to students. So especially at a time when students are balancing more than ever with work and other priorities alongside their studies, it's a great thing to keep in mind. But yes, that is it for me. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Libby. Indeed, thanks very much to all of you for your self-discipline in keeping to your time. Before we move on to the Q&A, I'd just like to make a couple of points myself. First, I'm sorry, here's my video coming up. Okay, first, I'm struck by the stability of the findings over the years. And I think that's something that can give you quite a lot of confidence in the findings, because if from year to year the same questions gave rise to quite different findings, then I think you'd be entitled to wonder about them. Second, Gosia is quite clear from her regression analyses that differences in the experiences of students are not the result of personal characteristics, things like male or female, home or international, and so on. And I think Nicola made the same point, but and David as well. But the characteristics of the university and what it provides, and so on. The trouble with that is, I wonder whether, in a time of increasing financial constraint, what the implications of that will be, or indeed are now. Third, this survey is largely about student perceptions, which might raise some eyebrows. But I would remind you that the survey monitors changes from year to year. And so although perceptions may not in themselves be definitive, changes in perception, or rather a great deal of stability shown here, are of genuine interest. And finally, there are objective questions, and they've been referred to several times, which aren't perceptions about things like academic effort, time spent studying, time spent in paid work, missed lessons, and so on. And I've no doubt that those are a very solid basis for further review and analysis. On the attendance gap, perhaps this is something that Gosia will come back to in the Q&A, but the attendance gap may partly be, of course, because of paid work and other things that students have to do, but partly because I think I did notice somewhere in the report that the actual hours scheduled have increased. And of course, I mean, if you increase the number of hours and you just carry on going to the ones that you used to go to, that increases your attendance gap. So I don't know how relevant that is. Anyway, so now we move on to questions and comments. We've already got quite a few in the bar. Type them in and upvote the ones that you would like to, especially to see answered. And if there are any questions or comments that any panel member would especially like to address, then please let me know and we'll address those. I will ask, we'll begin anyway by asking the person who asked the question to put it themselves to the panel, but we'll see how it goes. So the first I see came from Barry Quinn. So is Barry in a position to ask his question?
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. My question was that when the survey started, this was the pre-mobile phone era. So it was very different and it was before social media. So what changes do you think in the way students have now learned? Because we've gone from the pre-mobile phone, YouTube, social media, and how that may have affected expectations, and also their ability to concentrate in a lecture theatre.
Yeah, okay, thanks for that. We'll take one more question and then we'll ask the panel to address those as best they can. And that is from Mary Cook, one of the HEPI trustees. Mary.
Yeah, hello, can you hear me all right, Bahram?
Yes, we can, yeah.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, everyone. What a great webinar so far. And my question really was, what's the so what of all of this? So if universities are increasingly unable to afford to invest in areas that contribute to good experience, belonging, etc., and students are less and less able to afford the time or money to go to their studies and enjoy the wider student experience, you know, what does it, in other words, all the charts are kind of heading in the wrong direction, slowly but surely over the 20 years. And so my question is, what does this mean for the future of higher education and the shape of the higher education offer when both students and universities are highly financially constrained?
Yeah, thanks for that, Mary. Very similar to the point that I made about the students, the successful student experience, depending on university investment. We'll take those two questions together. I don't know, Nicola, would you like to? I don't know, you've done any research on how students learn and their pre-mobile phone, post-mobile phone, etc. But and then Cheryl might have a view on that as well.
Look, I'm sure there is research on this area, but I would just point to what Gosia's report suggests, which is that to some extent the evidence is students are looking for both online and in person. So it's not really either or. It's just a greater sort of sophisticated approach to how students learn. So I'm sure, I think it was Barry's question is absolutely right, that there is a shift, but it doesn't necessarily, I think, preclude the essential significance of in-person contact in terms of learning. I mean, Mary's question, how can one possibly answer that very simply? But can I just point to one thing again in the report, which is the centrality of teaching? And I think everything else, given the scale of financial pressures, means that, yes, these are important factors, but I think we really need to keep our focus as a sector on how do we secure good quality teaching, and what does that mean about, you know, supporting the teachers as well as the teaching. And I think all we can do, given the scale of financial constraints, is just focus on the core.
But taking just that last one, and I'd ask David this, who runs a university. I mean, given the financial constraints and what we now know about what really matters to students in terms of their experience, does that concern you?
Well, first of all, can I just say something about the mobile phone era?
Go on then, yes.
And which is actually, when the survey started, the mobile phone was very widely distributed amongst students, because you have to go back to the late 1990s to that being a new phenomenon. So I'm not sure that the survey necessarily shows as much about that. What it might show is this issue of virtual teaching and being able to interact as we are now. And what I think the survey is pointing towards is that in-person experiences are very important and deeply valued. And the experience of the pandemic has meant that students value their lecturer knowing their name and not only appearing on a screen. And there may have been there's a spectrum in the student body, of course, about this, but I'm talking here about younger students between the ages, broadly speaking, of 18 and 23, who are very strongly, I think, of that view. And I do think that comes out in some of the survey data. Obviously, the financial crisis gripping the British universities, it's different in each of the jurisdictions, is very serious, and is definitely having a significant impact on the student experience. Different university leaderships are grappling with it very differently. Some are doubling down back on engagement, a very thoughtful point I thought Cheryl made, and thinking that that's something that we need to do. Others are trying to respond by lopping off bits of the university and making sure that actually there's less engagement, because that appears to be the more efficient and financially sustainable thing to do. The current situation can't last. It's going to explode, and we'll need major reform of everything. All we can say at the moment, I think, this is the subject of at least another 3 seminars, is that the existing system, certainly in England, where I've been working all my adult life, has failed miserably, and that the 2012-2017 reforms are in grave danger of turning the English part of the British system of higher education from one which was world admired and world leading as a system to one which is only populated by a relatively small number of successful institutions and otherwise is a mess.
David, that's meat for, as you say, another seminar, so we'll come back to that. Just finally on this, Libby, I don't suppose you're old enough rather, to remember pre-mobile phone days, but do you have any insights on that part of the question?
Yeah, no, I don't think I was born in 2003, so I'm not really have that perspective. But I do think it's really interesting, and it's seen in some of the work that I've done, especially the sort of post-COVID shift in that, because people were so heavily reliant on social media and the mobile phones during COVID, that they wanted to then come out of that, and you see that in the report when the sort of value for money comes back into wanting to be in person, wanting to have a relationship with the staff that you work with. So I think it's definitely had an impact, but I do think COVID has kind of turned that upside down almost, and people were very open and to spending a lot of time online on social media. It was easy for them pre-COVID, and then that has almost switched because you kind of forced into it.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Okay. Yeah, thank you for that. Okay, I think we move on. We're running out of time. So we have a question from Michael Larkin. Michael, would you like to ask your question?
Unmute. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, good. A simple question. My understanding, having taught students for 37 years, is that they're very concerned about the grade of degree they get, what class of degree, and whether their working lives and non-attendance will impact it. I have many discussions like that. So what I'm wondering is, I know it's not in these reports, but has any university really got a grip on how many hours their students are working and what impact that's having on their attainment and degree class? The one thing they're very worried about.
Just one thought from me on that before the panel gets their teeth into it. I remember some research, and this is quite old research now. I don't know how valid it still is, that students working up to 15 hours a week actually benefited from the work they did outside their study, but beyond 15 hours a week, it began to have a negative effect. Now, I don't know whether Rose, has HEPI done any work on this? Is there anybody else in the panel that can have a view on this question?
So we published a report with the University of Lancashire a few months ago that looked in detail at how much students are working and also the quality of their work and the impact that was likely to have on their outcomes. And if students are working a large number of hours, then yes, unsurprisingly, that does have an impact on the quality of their degree in the end, but also that quality of their work had an impact as well. So really low quality, unsupported, unstable work had a negative impact on their degree outcomes.
Well, that's, I mean, and you've got to look at it university by university, of course, because who knows the value of looking at grades between universities. But okay, anybody else on that question, please? Because it's been upvoted 4 times. It's obviously
I would like to mention something with the attendance. I mean, firstly, I wanted to say to Nicola, I think that it's really important not to lose the sight that, yeah, the report and the quality of teaching, it's literally crucial, still very, very crucial to a university experience. Attendance, you, Bahram, mentioned that, you know, the hours increased, we worried about attendance, but I wanted to draw your attention to the fact that the notion of attendance may also have changed in the survey post-COVID. So it is growing. The attendance is, sorry, not growing. The attendance gap is growing, but also it might be changing. It's not about growing, but it also might be changing, because now you may consider, if you attended a lecture online, you did attend it. So just wanted to throw that in a mix, that how students these days understand attendance might be different than 10 years ago.
Okay, thanks. David, you were on the brink of saying something?
I think it's a very important point, working too much. And your point about, you know, up to 15 hours is probably a good thing rather than a bad thing is also most insightful. And I think institutions are doing lots about this. I mean, we have several food banks, but so do plenty of other universities. We sustain a scholarship program, which is funded by generous donors. Our staff have raised £250,000 in the last year, including I walked 280 kilometres to raise money for student hardship. And we employ several hundred students every year deliberately to make it easy for them to dovetail with their studies, because we know that otherwise people are tempted to work not over 20 hours, just 20 hours, but 30 hours. And it's not possible to study full time and to essentially work full time for the vast majority of people and to be successful. And it's very undermining of the student experience. So I think it's a very important question and point.
Thank you very much, David. That's helpful. Libby, you have a point to make?
Yeah, it was just very quickly around what we've seen in our institution, the difference between attendance and engagement in the way that students might not be attending as much as they need to because of work and other commitments, but still being engaged in the check-ins of logging in online, tapping your card in to go to the library. If they have the engagement, they are still not missing out in that they're not missing their like exams and degree outcome, things like that. But it's just, yeah, it's that difference between, yes, they might not be able to come in to sit in the classroom, but they are still keeping on top of the workload. But yeah, over 20 hours is a very it's a very difficult one to kind of balance for students. And as David was saying, we do the same thing. I mean, even internally in our student union, we employ over 300 student staff because they all have more of a better experience working closer to us and close to the university to balance everything that they've got going on.
Interesting, thank you. Okay, we'll move on then to the next question. Anonymous, which we can't, I suppose, do. So Josh Freeman, can we move on to Josh Freeman's question?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, indeed.
Great. Thank you. Josh Freeman, formerly of HEPI, now at the Office for Students. I've partly had this answered, but just on the attendance point, is this connected at all to what's going on in schools, the sort of big crisis in attendance that we've seen in schools? Is there a relationship there? And I guess Gosia's partly answered it, but are we confident that attendance is as high as these figures seem to suggest? Sort of anecdotally, we've heard that the situation on campus is a lot quieter. So is that the case, and what's going on there?
And I don't know who wants to answer that, but before they do, may I just point out, Josh, that attendance in English universities anyway is significantly lower than it is in most universities around other countries in the world. I mean, there's the Euro student survey that shows that English students study quite a lot less than those in other countries. But that's just a throw. I mean, it's an interesting question that needs to be answered. Anybody in the panel offering to answer that question? Gosia, I suppose it's really a factual question. Do you have an answer to that?
Well, it is a factual question, so I cannot really comment, how accurate students, respond in a survey and saying this is how many hours I've got, this is how many I attend. The missing missed data in a survey is actually really low, and because the students who respond to this survey, they're part of a panel of Savanta, so they're highly motivated to respond and respond fully. So it's for me too hard to comment. And I think that you said that partially it's already been explained by the fact that maybe the notion of attendance is changing. Also, I really like Libby's points about engagement and the fact that the engagement for current students looks very different. They may feel engaged because they had just a Barney on WhatsApp or something, and that's engaging for them. They don't have to do it in a classroom anymore. So we need to take that into account as well.
Anybody else like to take that question? No. Okay. So
I was just Bahram, sorry, if
yeah.
I could just make a comment.
Yeah.
I think also probably more of a question than a response to it, to be honest, is how it's going to change in the future. I'm coming at this purely from a perspective as a mother with a daughter going into GCSEs and the way in which they revise, consume content. I guess back to that mobile question is, it looks and feels very different now, and that's going to translate into how they expect and go through a university experience as well. So it's going to be, I think technology is going to far accelerate what it's done in the last few years over the next 5 to 6. So it'll be very interesting to see, what's next as well.
Okay. We'll have time for one more question, and it's from an anonymous attendee, but upvoted twice. So I'll ask it. How is the sense of belonging changing with more students commuting to university? I think that was one of the findings. I don't know whether David, are you experiencing more commuting students in your university, and do you think this has an impact?
Yes, it has got an impact, and it's definitely an issue. And we've been doing surveys about this and are changing the way in which we structure some of the sort of space that we've got at the university to make it much easier for people to sit down, not in a place where people are eating or in a place where people are studying, but just sit down to be able to engage, make mobile phone calls, and which isn't the Students' Union. We try to promote people going to the Students' Union, but it's just in every part of the university, so it's nice and easy to do. And it's the commuting students who use the facility that we've already developed a bit more than the other students. So I think it's a very important question.
Yeah. And Libby, in your university, are you finding commuting students an issue in terms of integration?
Yeah, it's definitely on the rise. And then specifically from my background of sort of kind of working in that belonging sense, it is quite difficult to kind of connect with commuter students based on the kind of completely different needs to students living on campus, and they still want to be going to events, socializing with different students, finding their community and that sense of belonging. But it's quite difficult to do when they have got like other commitments and work, but also kind of just have completely different needs to kind of the average 18-year-old student. So it is definitely something that we're looking at. And one of our kind of satellite campuses has a very large proportion of commuter students, and the engagement with them is very, very different to kind of what you would expect as the typical university student.
And will probably become more of an issue as time passes. Okay, well, we've come to 2 o'clock. We've come to the time for the seminar to end. We haven't quite ended because I'm going to ask whether there are any final points that our panel members want to make. I'm looking at my screen, and the order in which I see people is David first. David, have you any final minute or so that you want to?
I just wanted to make the point that I think that the development of artificial intelligence is very significant for enabling students to essentially have a personal academic tutor. They need to be taught how to use the personal academic tutor to full effect. But there's an opportunity for us to use technology for engagement in a really quite revolutionary way. And I think that will be very important in the years ahead. So
okay, thank you. Cheryl, next, any final comments from you?
Yeah, I think again, to my point earlier, it's about how we treat students as individuals. That I think what's come across us through every panel member today is that there is no one size fits all, and that's increasingly going to be more difficult to service as we go through into the years. Commuter students, we are actually supporting some research on that later in the year, because technology plays a huge part in how we support our institutions to service that growing sort of segment of students. But yeah, thank you for having me.
Oh, thanks for coming. Libby, any final point from you?
Yeah, I just wanted to thank everyone for all of the contributions. I think it's been really interesting. And then kind of similarly to what everyone else was saying, I think there's a lot of uncertainty at the minute with AI, with the kind of sector in general for both staff and students. And I think that sense of belonging for me, I think, is so important to pull through out the other side of it. Yeah.
Okay.
I haven't got a solution for that, but I think it's a great thing to prioritise.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Nicola, any final point from you?
I think the impact of AI, as David said, on all of the issues we've been discussing is really profound and really significant. And it would be really good to see whether that can be pulled out more specifically and deliberately in future iterations of the Student Academic Experience Survey.
Or indeed seminars and research in their own right.
All seminars like this, exactly.
Gosia?
Not really, no. I mean, I'm glad you really liked it. And I think that the sense of belonging, there's a lot of discussion about sense of belonging, and I think it would be a great idea for a sequel. So if someone would like to look at sense of belonging student academic experience survey, that would be fantastic.
Okay. Rose, I'm sorry I didn't introduce you at first. I didn't know you would be on the panel, but it's nice to have you. Any final points from you?
No, I was just here as backup and ended up making it.
Okay.
So I won't join in, but thank you, Bahram.
Well, thank you. Okay, well, in that case, may I just say thank you to everybody, to HEPI for organising this, and TechnologyOne for sponsoring this as well. Thanks to the panel. This was a very, very insightful, helpful discussion, and thanks to the audience and the questions that came in. They were great. Thank you all very much indeed.